The 1910s is the decade of fashion history that nobody really cares about. She's the unpopular girl, sitting alone in the corner, waiting for someone to ask her to dance. But the gentlemen always prefer her much more poised and delicate older sister, the Edwardian lady, or her younger, far more fun-loving, exuberant sister, the 1920s flapper. And much like those gentlemen, while working on this, I too found myself fantasizing about the 1920s. Hi, my name is Ray. Welcome. This video is part of a series where I explore the decades of the 1900s. And if you're interested, I've already covered the earlier decade of the 1900s, the Edwardian period, and I will link the video somewhere. Anyway, for each decade, I will illustrate the fashion and the beauty standards. First, some simple illustrations so we understand the rules. And then I will try to design two full outfits. One fit for daytime and one fit for glamorous nighttime activities. However, this period presented some challenges. It's considered a transitional era in fashion history where big changes happened. So the difficult part was to design outfits that don't look either too Edwardian or too 1920s. So for that, we're gonna go to Paris, France and talk about La Belle Epoque, a period of French and European history that began in 1871 and ended in 1914 when World War I started. It was considered a golden age, an age of peace and prosperity, enlightenment, optimism, joie de vivre. During this time, there were significant technological, scientific, and cultural innovations, and the arts flourished, with one of the most popular art movements of the time being, of course, Art Nouveau, which I took a little bit of inspiration from, especially for the hair, but more on that later. Now, let's get back to the 1910s. When it comes to beauty standards, not much has changed since the 1900s. Pale, porcelain skin, rosy cheeks, and no respectable lady would wear even a hint of makeup, allegedly. But I've already drawn that lady, and I won't be doing it again. So today, I'm going to draw a different kind of lady. Less respectable, scandalous even, a demi-mondaine, which comes from demi-monde, a French word that literally translates to half-world, and is a word used to describe a woman on the fringes of respectable society, pretty much synonymous with courtesan, but could also be a woman who cares little about the conventions of high society and much prefers the hedonistic nightlife of Paris. So, unlike the respectable Edwardian lady who follows the rules, she takes inspiration from elsewhere, like the silver screen or this new magazine for women called Vogue, where the starlets are not afraid of a little eye makeup or mascara. But while the makeup is getting bolder, the hair isn't. It gets progressively smaller and more natural. The short bob haircut has already been introduced around 1909, but I decided to keep her hair long to avoid much overlap with other decades. So instead, I took inspiration from the illustrations of Alphonse Mucha and the whole Art Nouveau approach to hair. These naturally flowing, organic lines. Also, very fun to draw. So I kept it simple, a soft, curly updo. During this decade, beauty standards finally allowed a complexion darker than feta cheese. A light tan was apparently acceptable, so I took a lot of artistic liberties with that. And now, I'm going to make myself a feta cheese sandwich. Anyway, completely unrelated, I decided to give her olive-colored eyes. And of course, lip stains and rouge remained an essential part of beauty routines, so I went with this berry shade, for historical accuracy, probably. If not, it's cute. And now, we move on to rendering. So I started by shading the skin. The eyes presented some difficulties. In the hair, well, that's where I decided to ignore the laws of physics and go mostly off vibes, which felt more Art Nouveau. I added some warmth to the skin, deepened some shadows, and a few subtle, sensible highlights. And her lips ended up looking like they belonged in 2026. And that didn't seem to bother me. So my first illustration was done. And now we move on to what is arguably the biggest fashion innovation of the decade. But first, corsets are very much still a thing, but their shape evolved to fit the fashions of the time. So they are longer and narrower, designed to compress the hips and create a more elongated silhouette. As for bustles and hip padding, they are a thing of the past. But Our Lady, or demi-mondaine, she is a modern woman, with no reservations about abandoning the more constrictive fashions of the past and embracing something far more liberating and practical, the brassiere. Many influential designers of the time, like Paul Poiret, Lady Duff Gordon, also known as Lucille, and Madeleine Vionnet, claim to have introduced the bra as the correct undergarment to be worn with their new dress designs. But who actually invented it is still a bit unclear. What we do know is that it was patented in 1914 by an American publisher and writer named Mary Phelps Jacob. And this is the original design. But we're not doing that, because the garment was quickly picked up by the designers I mentioned earlier, and with their involvement, the design was refined and significantly improved. And there are many variations of these early designs, so I ended up going with something like this. A fairly simple bodice. I used a custom brush to add lace along the seams, added some weight line, so it matched with my art style. Then these little buttons in the front, and these cute bows. Some stitching, a couple of fabric folds, and with that, I was lulled into a false sense of security. I believed this decade would be simple, practical, and easy to draw. This will not last. But at the time, things were going well. So naturally, I moved on to color. I like to repeat colors, so I went with this light olive tone for the bodice, and for the lace and other detailing, I chose this lovely shade of baby puke, pastel yellow. Anyway, once the base colors were done, I moved on to shading. I started by defining the form. I added depth to the fabric folds and ruffles, refined some of the smaller details, and after a few final details, she was done. As I mentioned before, when it comes to fashion, this decade is difficult. It begins as a continuation of the Edwardian era, with the silhouette becoming softer and more fluid, but because La Belle Epoque is this golden age of prosperity and innovation, the designers innovate constantly. So there's Orientalism, where everyone becomes obsessed with Eastern influences. Parasols, turbans, vibrant colors, and there's also a revival of directoire or Regency fashion, with its really high waistlines and this long column-like silhouette, and then also the hobble skirt. A skirt so restrictive that sometimes women had to tie their knees together to walk in it. At the exact same time when everyone becomes obsessed with dancing the tango. And then of course World War I happens, and suddenly people realize that some of these fashions were, in practice, pretty fucking stupid. So fashion became simpler, more practical, and considerably less fabulous. But I wanted fabulous. So what I'm trying to say is that, historically speaking, I have no idea what I'm doing. And with that out of the way, the high necklines of the Victorian and Edwardian eras are officially outdated, or at the very least, deeply uncool. Because the modern silhouette of the 1910s features a lower V-shaped neckline. And for this outfit, I leaned into the Regency Revival silhouette with a high waistline marked by a sash and this long column-like shape. And of course, the cursed hobble skirt. draped and wide at the hips and very narrow around the ankles. Although I did give it a slit because I'm not a monster. Another thing that became fashionable at the time was the lampshade tunic, popularized by the French couturier Paul Poiret, who I've already mentioned before and most likely will mention again because he was very big during this decade. As for my design, I may have taken a few creative liberties with the lampshade tunic, mostly because I'm not entirely sure this still counts as a tunic. It's more like 2 skirts and a tiny jacket. But I stand by my choices. Now let's talk about Orientalism. The obsession begins in Paris in the year 1910 with a performance of Scheherazade from Ballet Russe, a lavish production inspired by 1001 Nights, which left Parisians wanting more. Beautiful silks and drapes, turbans, jewels, bold colors and patterns, and one man was happy to provide it. French couturier Paul Poiret. So, I drew a parasol. And then, with full confidence, I moved on to the base layer, which is everything except the tunic, since I wanted those layers to have some transparency to them. I finished the hair, and only after that, I realized I accidentally deleted the parasol. This was a waste of time, so I started spamming undo and praying to the gods of fashion that the parasol would reappear. Fortunately, it did. Unfortunately, I had to do all this again. And this entire situation was caused by my own incompetence in naming the layers properly. So having learned absolutely nothing, I moved on to the tunic. And since this decade is all about softness and fluidity, I kept these layers sheer and flowy. This outfit needed some contrast, so I made the sash and shoes the same color as her hair. Then, after an unreasonable amount of time spent struggling with the color palette, I eventually settled on this soft aquamarine and off-white combination. At this point, the outfit was feeling a little too simple, so I added some lace detailing to give it more texture. And because my struggle with the color palette wasn't over yet, I changed the color of the parasol. I added some lace and started on the shading. And let's just say when it comes to drapery, am I particularly skilled at rendering folds? No. Did that stop me? Also no. And rendering fabric folds on transparent layers is an even bigger pain in the ass. So after adding some color variation, deepening some of the shadows, and only a few little emotional breakdowns, my first full outfit was finally complete. And now that we know what we're doing, it is time to indulge. But before we move on to the evening gown, I wanted to start with a little taste of Belle Epoque decadence. So naturally, I designed a very dramatic headpiece. After all the struggle with the Daywear, it felt strangely peaceful to return to something familiar, these Art Nouveau curls, and drawing them remains incredibly satisfying. Since our demi-mondaine is fully committed to everything modern, fashionable and opulent, she fully embraces the Orientalist craze of this era. So I designed this headpiece to resemble a turban, but still leave room for the updo at the top. And of course, for the evening ensemble, I fully committed to the inspiration behind it. Because when I think of rich colors, luxury, decadence, I think of one thing: peacock. So I found this convenient feather asset, adjusted its shape, and it was looking a little lonely, so I added a couple more. And then I decided this look wouldn't be complete without some opulent jewelry. After all, ornamental jewelry is such an important part of Art Nouveau illustration, especially elaborate headpieces and oversized earrings. And now that I think about it, the earring is probably just part of the headpiece and not actually an earring. Alas, we've committed. So we move forward, on to color. I initially went with this darker navy tone for the turban, but it didn't really complement her hair, so I switched to something lighter, like a cobalt blue. I kept the navy tones for the center of the peacock feathers and these gems, and slowly worked my way through the rest of the peacock palette. I added some turquoise, some gold, obviously, this lovely shade of swamp green, so I played around with various shades of green and eventually moved on to making the gold shiny. And then the shading. Our demi-mondaine is, of course, not shy about makeup, so after some lip stain and rouge, I added a little bit of eye makeup. Sometimes women would use henna to line their eyes, so this berry tone is not historically accurate. And after a few highlights, some deeper shadows, some more highlights, she was ready. And now the time has come for me to show you my full peacock. Like the Daywear, this ensemble continues the layered silhouette of the era, with a flowy tunic over a long underskirt. Kind of. It's actually more like two dresses layered on top of each other, and I'm starting to question if I'm capable of drawing a tunic. But that's a problem for a future video. The outer layer features a deep V-neck, a high empire waist, and wraps around the body in a way that's loosely inspired by a kimono. And the skirt is, of course, heavily draped, because I love drapery and I will absolutely not struggle rendering it. I'm not even struggling now. Anyway, onto the underlayer, which is, you guessed it, also draped. And because this ensemble clearly didn't have enough layers, I added a third one. These wrap-around cocoon-shaped coats were very fashionable at the time. They drew inspiration from kimonos, broad at the shoulders and narrow at the hem. Although in my illustration, the actual shape doesn't read that clearly since the coat is mostly there to dramatically fall off her shoulders. Also another important purpose, but we'll get to that later. I finished the underlayer with the lace trim around the neckline, the sleeves, and also the bottom hem to emphasize the slit of the skirt, because there is one thing this design needs to allow: the tango. So I also gave her tango shoes. After finishing the base layer, I drew these simplified versions of the assets I used earlier, and for once, I actually thought ahead. So I colored them in advance, which made the entire process significantly less painful. Especially this one. Now, I promised you the full peacock. And that is the other very important purpose of the coat. For the ladies who could afford such luxury, these coats were sometimes made of fur, or at least had a fur trim, often paired with enormous matching muffs. I chose not to add one because I didn't want to cover the front of the outfit. Also, instead of the fur trim, I decided to give her this massive peacock collar, which makes her look like a Disney villain, and continues down the coat with this full peacock tail. And after placing each feather individually, I was somehow still capable of experiencing joy. So after a few more feathers, I added a few more feathers. And then some line weights, so this whole peacock situation is cohesive with the rest of the illustration. Anyway, it was time to color the rest of it. I chose these vibrant green tones for the coat with a subtle ombre effect throughout the fabric, navy for the underlayer, and a rich cobalt blue for the overlayer that of course matches the headpiece. And because this whole ensemble could still use a little more opulence, I decided to add a few more gold accents, like the belt and the shoes. And now, there was only one thing left to do. Render it. Let's proceed. I like making shiny things shiny. My sanity is perfectly fine. Why do you ask? So after a few more final shinies and other things, behold, the demi-mondaine final boss of La Belle Epoque. I'm gonna be honest, I didn't think I was gonna make it through this one. I wouldn't say it was necessarily difficult, just a little confusing. There were so many ideas and styles and influences that I kinda got lost in them. So I found it difficult at times to just pick a direction and stick with it. But we made it. Thanks for watching. If you want to see me do this again for other decades or other historical periods entirely, feel free to like, comment, and subscribe. I also have an ongoing series on fashion and beauty standards in antiquity if you want to check that out, and I'll see you next time.